Chapter 15, La Catalina. We walked towards a cluster of adobe houses. Carlos had parked the car about a quarter of a mile up the road so that it would not be seen from the houses. "I'll show you where to wait, but I don't want to go inside or to cross the curer's path," he said with a furtive glance. "Why don't you want the curer to see you?" I asked suspiciously. "Because that curer is a witch. I've had some run-ins with her in the past. So it's best that she does not associate you with me or with Don Juan." I was growing more and more apprehensive. What should I tell her if she asks me why I am here? Just say that you're a student of anthropology and that she came highly recommended by some people in Vickham Station, and you're here because you want her to look at the flea bites on your legs. By the looks of the place, whoever lived there seemed to be highly successful. The house was larger than the other Yaqui houses in the area, and the grounds around it looked clean and well kept. There were even a few ornamental potted plants by the door, adding a decorative touch. An elderly couple were seated on a bench under the ramada. Two portly Mexican ladies were standing in the courtyard, waiting for their turn to see the curer. Seated on another bench was a woman with a child, and next to her sat a woman nursing an infant completely covered by a shawl. Towards the side of the house was a small corral where a donkey was kept. As I turned, I caught a glimpse of a man disappearing behind the corral as if he did not want to be seen. "Dona Catalina is the best curer in Sonora," Carlos said as we sat down on a vacant bench some distance from the house. "Mexicans as well as Indians come to see her. Don Juan says that she has more power than all the curers in this area put together." I noticed a touch of pride and also fear in his voice as he said this. "Do you know her well?" I asked. "Not at all. I met her once at a gathering of some of Don Juan's colleagues. Although, on several occasions, I have actually seen her work. She can remove a patient's organ, douse it in alcohol, and put it back into his body without making an incision or drawing blood." "Come now," I said incredulously. "That's impossible. She must be using some sort of trickery." I had heard of the psychic surgery used by some practitioners. Its purpose is similar to Western surgery, except that no blood is drawn and the patient is conscious during the procedure, but, unlike Western surgery, immediately afterwards the patient is able to get up and leave the premises with no scar or ill effects. "I bet it's a question of faith healing, where the patient is highly suggestible," I offered. "The anthropological literature is abound with studies of faith healers who, through the laying on of hands, cause the patient to experience a catharsis of sorts, during which time the healing takes place." I had seen a demonstration of such healing on television. People just dropped their crutches and began to walk again, or, miraculously, they could hear or see. I had never given much credence to this sort of curing and had always considered it to fall into the category of what anthropologists called healing by hysterical conversion. The effects in such cases were usually temporary and treated the symptoms rather than the illness itself, which often returned when the person came to his senses and the force of public support was removed. "She's not a faith healer," Carlos said decisively. "Then how does Dona Catalina practice her art? Does she use sleight of hand?" "According to anthropological accounts, the only way such a surgery could possibly be produced, since it defies reason and the laws of science, is through the use of some sort of chicanery. The usual explanation offered is that the onlookers are put into a hypnotic trance through the use of repetitive sounds, such as chanting or drumming. Then the curer goes to work producing spectacular effects, much as a magician performs tricks that amaze an audience who only see what the magician allows them to see." "No. She doesn't use sleight of hand," Carlos said. "Some charlatans probably do rely on tricks such as having a spare organ up their sleeve, but Catalina does something else, much more spectacular." "What is that?" I asked, laughing at the image of someone having a dripping goat's heart or liver hidden under their poncho and producing it at just the right moment to amaze the onlookers. "Catalina cures by changing the reality around her, and anyone who is witnessing the operation, including the patient himself, participates in this altered reality. I don't understand, I said, moving away from a coughing patient who had come to stand by the bench where we were sitting. If we depart from the premise, as the sorcerers do, that the real world is also a dream world and that it can be perceptually altered if one has enough power, then the curer, who is also a sorceress, can change the reality immersing them by altering the consensus of the people involved. Then all those who are present actually witness a world with new perceptual parameters. They are forced to acknowledge what they see with a new intersubjective agreement to replace the old one. Isn't this a form of mass hypnosis? I queried. Not really, Carlos replied, unless you call being alive or what we are experiencing now a form of hypnosis. What Catalina does is to alter the awareness of her patients and the awareness of whoever is witnessing her curing, and of course her own awareness, which is subject to the dreaming and stalking abilities of sorcerers. Then whatever happens for them is as real as the world we are experiencing now sitting here on this bench. You mean she uses her dream body during her curing sessions? I asked. That is what happens. She has learned to utilize parts of her dreaming reality and is able to project it onto people's everyday reality so powerfully and completely that profound disruptions take place. Then she uses her stalking techniques to fill in the breaks and makes life recognizable to the onlookers, although its features are markedly different from the everyday reality, but just as real. How is it different from everyday reality? Well, she can remove an organ without drawing blood. Within our consensual reality, that is impossible to do. I see what you mean, I said with a shudder. I wondered how healers like Catalina acquired such extraordinary powers to be able to change the world around them and cause everyone within their field of energy to experience the inconceivable. Waiting for my turn, I grew more uneasy, wondering what she would do to me once I got into her field of energy. Carlos had assured me that her powers were genuine and that no trickery was involved, and her fame attested to her skills as a curer. We had to wait for over 2 hours until all the people before us had been seen. In all that time I had gotten one glimpse of the curer, although the man lurking behind the corral came out and stood there for a while watching us from a distance. When it was our turn, Carlos told me to go in and that he would wait for me in the car. He reminded me not to mention that I was associated with Don Juan or himself, but to be attentive and see if I could detect anything strange about the curer. He emphasized that I should be silent and aware so I could catch as much as I could of Dona Catalina's stalking techniques. I entered the house with trepidation. A young Yaqui girl greeted me with a stern look. She seemed very capable and was even dressed as a nurse in a neat white uniform with white sandals. She asked me what my problem was. I immediately showed her the bites on my legs, which fortunately were still red and virulent. She nodded and took a white index card from a metal file box and wrote down my name along with the date and the reason I was there. When the curer was ready to see me, her young assistant led me into the inner room behind a dark wooden door. The girl handed her my card and quietly left the room. Immediately I sensed I was in the presence of a most remarkable woman. Dona Catalina was tall, perhaps in her mid-40s, and had on an open white smock over a blouse and a straight skirt. Her jet black hair was pulled back by a headband and was held in place in a high bun. She had no wrinkles and had a beautifully sculptured face, but what were most striking were her eyes. They seemed to burn with an energy coming from every inch of her vibrant body. I had not seen eyes like that except on Don Juan and his associates. This woman was handsome and had a mysterious inner power. I detected a confidence and a commanding manner that at the same time put me at ease, yet placed me somewhat at her mercy. I thought that the first prerequisite of a successful healing situation, that of faith in the curer's ability, was easily met in this case. What's more, Dona Catalina seemed to have a kindness and concern that immediately put me at ease despite the fact that she was a total stranger. I tried to talk to her in Spanish as best I could. She smiled at my efforts and said in fairly good English, "I want you to lie down on the bed with your head up." I lay down on a narrow cot draped with a clean white sheet and a small pillow. Following her instructions, I kept my head up, off the pillow, which is what I thought she had said. It was an awkward position and I couldn't understand why I couldn't put my head down, but she had specifically said to lie with my head up, so I strained my neck to keep my head off the cot. Perhaps it was part of the curing procedure. Donna Catalina gently pulled up my pant legs and examined the bites on my legs. They were not as red or swollen as before, but they still itched and were virulent. A few scabs had already formed where I had been unable to restrain myself from scratching. I craned my neck to see what Donna Catalina was doing. She was wiping my legs with some pungent liquid. By now my neck was getting tired and I could hardly keep it off the pillow. Donna Catalina gently opened the front closure of my Levi's and eased up my shirt to expose my stomach. Then she put some lotion on her hands and began massaging my abdomen in a circular fashion, first in a clockwise direction, then in a counterclockwise direction. As she moved her hands, I felt her fingers doing strange things. It felt like tiny rodents' feet moving all over my abdomen, causing an itching sensation, as if she were searching for something through her sense of touch. At a given moment, I realized that what Donna Catalina had meant was for me to lie on the cot face up, and she had not meant for me to keep my head up at all. I relaxed my neck muscles and laughed to myself as my head gratefully hit the pillow. I had been literal-minded again, as usual, like the time in an ice skating class when the instructor had told everyone to skate to the music and I headed right toward the sound speakers. I could hardly keep from giggling to myself. It must have been strange for Donna Catalina to see a gringa not wanting to let her head touch the pillow. I knew she must have thought I was afraid of catching lice or that her pillow wasn't clean enough. I had an uncontrollable urge to giggle at my own stupidity and tried my best to suppress my mirth as Donna Catalina kept exploring my stomach. "Am I tickling you?" she asked, noticing my suppressed smiles. "No, I'm fine," I said, trying to control my giddiness. I watched Donna Catalina's expression as she worked. It was calm and serious. She was totally engrossed, searching with her fingers for clues of what was happening under the skin. When she was finished with the examination of my midsection, she gestured that I could adjust my clothing again. "You have worms," she concluded. "I'm going to give you some medicine. Other than that, you're perfectly healthy." I was shocked to hear that I had intestinal worms. I mentally ran through a list of things I had eaten since coming to Mexico. I concluded that the cause was probably the donkey meat I had eaten in Santa Ana. "How do I get rid of them?" I asked, tucking in my blouse. "Stay away from men," she said matter-of-factly. "I beg your pardon?" I couldn't see what men had to do with intestinal parasites. "You still have many worms inside you," she repeated. Then I remembered what Clara had said about energetic worms. She had told me that during the sex act, men leave energetic filaments inside a woman's body which to a seer look like thousands of luminous worms. They remain inside the body of a woman for 7 years, feeding off her energy and making her grow weaker as the recipient males grow stronger. Each renewed contact between a man and a woman strengthens the ties and makes the energetic worms even more active. Perhaps the itching I had felt in my abdomen were the worms being pushed around by Donna Catalina's probing fingers. "What can I do to get rid of them?" I asked, alarmed. "Besides staying away from men?" For years I had been leading a celibate life, so as not to renew the connection or vigor of any worms contracted through past encounters. "Stay away from men," she repeated. "Then in time, the worms will die out by themselves." I nodded. I wondered how she knew about the luminous worms. Whether it was common knowledge among sorcerers. Or perhaps it was a subtle trap so that I would reveal my connection with Clara or Don Juan. I decided to play the devil's advocate. "How can you be sure I even have worms?" I asked. "I felt them with my hands," she replied. "There are more on your left side than on your right. These will be harder to get rid of. You are still attached to them and call them your own." I couldn't think why that would be so. I had done a thorough recapitulation of all sexual encounters and felt very detached from them. I watched Donna Catalina fill a small plastic bottle with some pink liquid that looked like Pepto-Bismol. She tightly sealed the cap and placed the bottle on the table. You are to take a teaspoonful 3 times a day, she instructed. Wash down there with water boiled with rosemary, eat more and worry less. What makes you say I worry? I asked sheepishly. She looked me straight in the eyes. I can tell from the condition of your spleen, she replied. I wasn't just massaging your stomach, I was examining each of your internal organs, your liver, spleen and kidneys. I can tell what you are feeling in them. If they are happy or sad, calm or agitated. You mean to say that internal organs have emotions? I asked. She gave me the eeriest smile and nodded. If you don't treat them well, they won't give you a moment's peace, she said and handed me the pink medicine. I asked her how much her fee was. She shrugged and said that the plastic bottle and medicine cost 20 pesos, but that I could pay whatever I wanted to her assistant on my way out. I thanked her and was about to leave when she stopped me. You know Juan Matus, don't you? She said with a certainty that left no room for doubt. Did he send you here? Remembering Carlos's command not to mention that I was associated with them, I didn't know what to say, so I just stared at her dumbly. Did he bring you? She demanded again with an icy stare. I was totally on the defensive. No, he didn't, I said. She looked at me surprised, as if she didn't believe me. Really, I didn't come with anyone by that name, I insisted. She lost her pleasant manner. I came with a friend. He's waiting for me in the car. She gave me a penetrating glare that would freeze a lizard, then looked me up and down. You're not like the rest, she said. You certainly didn't come here to be cured. You have ulterior motives. Did you come here to spy on me, or to steal my power? Of course not, I said shocked. I assure you, I had the best intentions. I don't believe you. You came to steal my curing secrets, didn't you? All of a sudden, I became terrified. I broke out in a cold sweat. I wanted to leave, but she jumped in front of the door blocking the exit. I couldn't understand what had gotten into Donna Catalina. A moment ago she was a ministering angel. Her gentleness and confidence, I knew now, were stalkers' techniques designed to put me off guard. Now it was an instant reversal. She was an enemy, a dangerous adversary, a black sorceress of the most malignant kind. I don't know what you mean, I said. I have to leave now. Please step aside. And to match her confidence, I added, although not quite as energetically as I would have liked, I'm warning you, I know martial arts. At that she looked at me and laughed. I took a few backward steps to place more distance between us. I did no martial arts, but what good would that do in the face of this formidable opponent who was not only bigger than I was, but much more powerful? Every inch of Catalina was bursting with an aggressive yet focused energy. While I, on the other hand, was cowering until I hit the cot and could move back no further. Catalina just laughed at me, flashing her strong white teeth. Her laughter seemed to be a challenge, an animal grin of aggression, about which there was nothing friendly or humorous. If you don't move away from that door, I'll yell for help, I warned. My friend is by the car. He'll come running. Actually, that was only partially true. What I had neglected to add was that Carlos had parked the car a quarter of a mile away, and we had walked to her house. If he was by the car, he wouldn't have heard me even if I had yelled at the top of my lungs. And my friend is waiting by the corral across the courtyard, she said with a smirk. He'll come running even if I don't yell. If you don't believe me, just look out the window. I looked out the window and saw the same man who had been lurking by the corral, standing in the courtyard. At this distance I could tell there was something familiar about him. Then I remembered where I had seen him. It was while crossing the border at Nogales. It was the Indian who had caused me to faint and had taken that opportunity to pocket my gold pen. I felt fear grip my core as he gave me a most imperceptible nod of recognition, as if he, too, remembered the incident. I knew there was no escaping from this duo of sorcerers. Who was that man? I demanded to know. He's my protector, Catalina said with a smile, so don't try any funny business. With a single movement of her hand, she pulled at her headband, and her hair came tumbling down around her shoulders. She was absolutely wild, her eyes burning with fury. I was so frightened that my knees were shaking and I nearly sat down on the cot. On an impulse, I decided to escape through the window. I jumped onto the cot and pushed the casement window open, but I had only gotten my head and torso out when I felt something like hot iron shackles clamp down on my ankles. I screamed and saw the witch tugging at my feet. I kicked so hard that she had to let go and jump backwards, but she had me in a disadvantageous position. I was panting, with cold fury. If only I had my crystals so I could point them at her, was the thought that came to mind, but they were in a drawer in my desk, in Los Angeles. A lot of good they did me there, when I really felt I needed to use them here. No matter. I reached into my pocket and pretended to pull something out. I held my hands in the proper position for crystal dart throwing, with my arms extended and my index fingers pointing straight out at her. Watch out, I have crystals! I yelled. As I fixed her with my gaze, an unknown surge of strength filled me. No longer were my knees wobbling, they became strong, and my legs felt longer and longer, as if charged with an energy rising from the earth. My back cracked and straightened out, as energy shot up from the ground through my neck and out the top of my head. I seemed to be very tall, my head was practically touching the ceiling, and I was looking down at her, still pointing my fingers, with the imaginary crystal in my hands. Somehow that did the trick. Catalina stepped out of the range of my aim and gave me a frightened look. The next moment she was her confident self again, but I was raving mad. Juan did send you, didn't he? She said. You're his ally. You're crazy, I said, lowering my hands. Allies aren't human. I tried to control my breathing, and as I did I shrunk in size until I was no longer stretched out. I moved to the door on rubbery legs, just as it opened and Carlos stepped in. I felt so relieved that I hadn't time to consider what had happened. This feeling of being stretched out was familiar. I had felt it before, although I didn't know where or when. That witch wouldn't let me leave, I mumbled to Carlos. So I nearly zapped her with my crystals. I didn't know what I was saying. My hands were like ice. My teeth were chattering, I was freezing cold. Carlos took one look at Catalina, grabbed me by the arm and pulled me out of the house. I could hear the woman's eerie laughter following us all the way to the car. That woman is insane, I gasped. She wouldn't let me leave. She kept on insisting that Don Juan sent me to steal her power. I don't know what come over me. I think I hallucinated out of sheer anger or fright. I was so angry I nearly went through the roof, and I don't mean that figuratively. Catalina is the north wind, Carlos said. And very dangerous. Then why did you bring me to her? I demanded. She seemed so friendly and competent at first. Because she has power, he replied. I thought you might see how a real stalker operates. You saw her in action. I certainly did, but wasn't that dangerous? I asked. She knew I didn't come there just for my flea-bitten legs. Although she did give me some lotion which I left in the house. As long as she didn't suspect you were with me, I thought you would be safe, but I see I was wrong. She saw through you right away. Not right away, I corrected him. Only later, as I was about to leave. When we got in the car, Carlos asked me to recount everything that happened from the moment I entered the house, which I did to the best of my recollection. It all started out so amicably, I had to keep from laughing because I thought she had wanted me to keep my head up throughout the session for some mysterious reason. So I held this awkward position for as long as my neck could stand it. Then when I realized my error, I couldn't help giggling. That must have been what threw her off the track, Carlos said. You laughing and keeping your stomach tense. She couldn't really see inside you until you relaxed your body. Then she could see you weren't the same as everyone else. What do you mean? Catalina, being a seer, could see that your energy doesn't flow the same way as her other patients. What do you mean it doesn't flow the same way? How is it different? It isn't quite the human pattern of energetic movement, Carlos said. That's what gave her the idea that you were Don Juan's ally. She certainly did get suspicious. She kept asking me if Don Juan had sent me, and I kept insisting that he didn't. Then she really got angry and accused me of coming to steal her power, which certainly wasn't the case. Carlos listened to the rest of my account in silence, especially when I told him about the strange man in the back of her house. My teeth were still chattering. Just the thought of that woman and her protector made me shiver. North wind or not, she certainly could make someone freeze to the core. Carlos said I shouldn't talk about her anymore, because the more we talked about her, the easier it was for her to track us through our thoughts. You mean she's going to follow us? She's a powerful witch. She can follow us to the ends of the earth if she has the mind to, but I think she just wants us out of this area. We'd better just get our things and leave. You mean she's running us out of town? What would happen if we didn't go? She could make life very uncomfortable for us, especially at night. I wouldn't want to incur her wrath more than we already have. But I didn't mean any harm, I said. I didn't even know what I was supposed to look for. Her stalking techniques, Carlos reminded me. Like what? Didn't you notice her appearance? Was she old or young? Confident or at ease? She was very beautiful and confident and at ease. I liked her. I don't know why she reacted as she did. Are you sure we shouldn't go back and talk to her? Straighten things out? Believe me, it's better not to antagonize her further. There's no end to her power. You saw how young she made herself look. What do you mean, made herself look? How old is she? She's the Nawal Julian's cohort. That makes her very, very old. That would make her over 100, I gasped. But she didn't look a day over 40. Exactly. We'll leave here right away. Do you think she'll let us go? Your display of the double caught her off guard. I saw the tail end of it. You must have put the fear of the devil in her. What display? All I wanted to do was to get out of there. Something came to your rescue, and it wasn't me. Where will we go? I asked. We have two choices, Carlos said. We can either go north to Los Angeles, or we can go south to Guadalajara. Just then a crow alighted from a tree branch and flew toward the hills in the distance. I opened my compass and checked the direction. It was flying due south. My feeling is we still have unfinished business in Mexico, Carlos said as the car picked up speed.